For 1,000 years, the Roma walked across Europe with no pharmacy, no hospital, and no doctor who would even see them. And yet their children lived, their wounds healed, and their old people reached old age. Their medicine was not locked in a cabinet. It was growing in the ditch, the hedge, and the forest edge, free for anyone who knew where to look. They even had a word for it, drab, meaning herb and medicine at once. These are 20 of the healing plants the Gypsies used for centuries, and the last one was so powerful that armies carried it into 2 world wars. One honest word before we begin. These are old folk traditions, not medical advice. Enjoy the history, and for anything serious, always see a real doctor. Now, if you love the knowledge the world forgot, subscribe and stay to the end, because number 1 is a plant sitting in your kitchen right now. Number 20 is the plant that grew in every ditch and calmed 1,000 aching bellies. Mint, wild mint spread along every damp roadside across Europe, and a Roma healer needed only to reach down and gather a handful. The fresh leaves were torn and dropped into hot water for a heavy, cramping stomach after a hard meal, and the cooled tea was given to a child with a sore, gassy belly. They chewed the raw leaves to freshen a stale mouth and clear a dull, aching head. That bright, cooling tingle is a natural oil the plant makes to protect itself. The very same thing that now flavors half the digestive remedies on a pharmacy shelf. The Roma simply grew theirs for nothing. To a wandering family, a plant that healed, grew everywhere, and cost not a single coin, was not a weed at all. It was a small green blessing waiting by the side of the road. They also crushed a few cool leaves against the temples to ease a pounding head on a hot afternoon, and laid the bruised leaves over a tired brow. Mint follows people wherever they settle, springing up around old camps and cottages alike, as if the plant itself had quietly decided to travel with the ones who needed it most. Number 19 turned a common garden bush into a healer's tool. Sage. Its soft, silver-green leaves were steeped strong and left to cool, then used as a gargle when a throat turned red and a voice went rough and cracked. A few leaves were even rubbed across the teeth and gums to clean and freshen the mouth before facing strangers on market day. The Roma trusted it so completely that a healer rarely traveled without a pouch of dried sage tucked away. And here is the telling part. The plant's very name shares an old root with the words for health and for saving. The people who named it, centuries ago, were quietly telling us what it did. The camp healer could never have explained the oils inside a sage leaf, but she did not need to. She had watched 100 rough voices come back by morning, and that was all the proof she ever asked for. They would also lay a few dried leaves on the fire to sweeten the close, smoky air of a shut-up wagon in winter and tuck them among stored clothes to keep them fresh. A hoarse voice, to a people who sang for their supper and bargained hard for their bread, was never a small thing. It was their living, and sage was how they guarded it. Number 18 you could smell on a Roma woman long before you saw her coming. Rosemary. They rinsed their long dark hair with cooled rosemary water to keep it glossy and bright, and breathed its sharp, piney scent to shake a foggy head awake on a slow gray morning. A sprig was tucked behind the ear or into a pocket simply to be breathed in through a dull afternoon on the cart. They believed it sharpened the mind, strengthened the memory, and lifted a heavy, low spirit. And centuries later, the gentle truth of it still holds. That bright, resinous smell really does seem to nudge a tired, drifting mind back to attention, which is exactly why it still scents soaps and oils in every shop today. The Roma had no word for focus. They simply knew which plant by the door could hand it to them, for free, on the worst of mornings. A strong rosemary wash was also splashed over aching feet at the end of a long day's walking, and a sprig of it was hung in the wagon doorway simply to keep the air sharp and clean. To a people always moving, a familiar smell was a kind of home you could carry with you, and rosemary, more than any other, was the smell of the road done right. Number 17 calmed the body and the mind at the very same time. Lavender. The purple sprigs were tucked into bedding and folded clothes to invite sleep and keep the moths away, rubbed straight onto insect bites to draw the maddening itch out, and steeped into a soft tea on a frayed, anxious evening. They used the one plant to soothe a bite, a small burn, and a racing, worried mind all alike. A pinch under a child's pillow could settle a whole restless wagon on a hard night. It is no accident at all that lavender still sits inside half the calming products sold in the world today. The Roma were simply a few hundred years ahead of us, and they understood something we are only now relearning, that calming a frightened mind was every bit as much a part of healing as mending a broken body. A few drops of oil pressed from the flowers were rubbed into the temples to ease a tight pounding head, and a cool lavender wash was dabbed over a whole cluster of bites after a night camped near the marshes. In a life with so little privacy and so much worry, a plant that could quiet the mind was never a luxury. It was survival of a gentler kind. Number 16 was the flower saved all summer for the long dark nights of winter, chamomile. Those small daisy-like blossoms were gathered through the warm months, tied in little bunches, and hung to dry from the wagon roof. Then they were steeped into a pale golden tea, given to calm a fussing child, settle a nervous stomach, and coax a tired footsore body down toward sleep. On a cold night, with the wind snapping at the canvas overhead, that little cup of warmth was never only medicine. It was a quiet ritual that told a frightened child the day was safely over and the family was whole. A warm cup of chamomile before bed is still, after all these centuries, one of the gentlest sleep traditions left anywhere on earth, and it began with a weed that most people were too busy to notice growing at their feet. The cooled tea was also used as a gentle wash for sore, tired eyes, and for a baby's irritated skin, and a strong rinse was said to bring out the gold in a child's hair. One small flower, so many quiet jobs, which is exactly why the Roma never let a summer pass without gathering armfuls of it while it bloomed. Number 15 was the breath a Roma mother reached for when a chest went tight in the night. Thyme. The tiny fragrant leaves were brewed into a strong tea for a rattling, barking cough, or thrown by the handful into a bowl of steaming water to breathe in slowly, with a blanket draped over the head to trap the warm scented vapor. It was used to help loosen a heavy, stubborn chest and ease the difficult breathing of a cold. The oils that give thyme its sharp, clean smell are still studied today for the gentle way they seem to quiet a cough. And that simple bowl of thyme steam is a remedy you could make for yourself tonight, with nothing bought from a shop, exactly as a Roma mother made it 200 years ago, kneeling by the fire with a wheezing child and a blanket over them both. The same strong brew, cooled, was also used to wash out a small wound and keep it clean. For thyme has a natural power to hold back the things that turn a cut bad. A Roma healer prized a plant that could do two jobs at once, clear a chest by night and clean a graze by day, because on the road, everything you carried had to earn its place twice over. Number 14 was the plant they trusted for a griping stomach, even in the very youngest. Fennel. The feathery herb and its little seeds were brewed into a mild, sweet, faintly licorice tea, sipped to ease bloating and calm the painful cramping of a heavy gut. A weak, cooled brew was even given, drop by careful drop, to soothe the colic of a crying infant when nothing else in the camp would quiet it. And the seeds were chewed slowly after a meal to freshen the breath and settle the belly at once. Fennel water for a colicky baby is one of those old, gentle traditions that spread across half the world, from Roma wagons to grand nurseries alike, because it was soft enough for the smallest stomach and it simply, quietly worked. Some plants earn their place in the pouch by saving a life. Fennel earned its by saving a mother a sleepless night. The little seeds were dried and carried loose in a pocket or a twist of cloth, ready to be chewed after any heavy meal on the road. There is a special tenderness in a remedy soft enough for a newborn, and the fact that the Roma trusted fennel with their smallest and their newest tells you everything about how gentle and how proven they knew it to be. Number 13 grew in every field and meadow, and the Roma saw a tonic where everyone else saw a weed, dandelion. The young leaves were eaten in early spring salads while they were still tender, and the thick root was dug up, scrubbed, roasted dark over the coals, and ground into a bitter brew. It was taken to wake a sluggish stomach and freshen a body worn, thin and gray by a long winter of salted, preserved road food. That sharp, bitter taste was the whole point. Bitter plants gently encourage the stomach and the gut to get to work, which is exactly why dandelion still turns up in old-fashioned tonics today. To a Roma family, the first bitter green tonic of the year was a quiet signal that the worst of the cold was finally behind them, and that the open, greening road lay ahead once again. Nothing of the plant was ever wasted. The bright flowers were turned into a sweet cordial, and the milky stem was dabbed on warts and small blemishes. To a family that owned almost nothing, a plant that gave food, drink, and medicine, all from a single roadside clump, was no weed underfoot. It was a small, stubborn miracle that grew back no matter how often the world tried to pull it up. Number 12 was dug straight out of the ground for the sake of the skin, burdock. The long, stubborn taproot was scrubbed clean and simmered for hours into a dark, earthy tea, taken as a tonic, and used to calm rough, troubled, breaking out skin. The Roma trusted it especially for anyone whose face had gone tired, gray, and dull after too long on the road, with too little to eat. It is one of the oldest skin plants in the entire book, used quietly for centuries across half the world. And in a small, delightful twist of history, the prickly burrs of that very same plant, catching stubbornly on a man's trousers one afternoon, are exactly what gave the world the idea for Velcro. The Roma had been pulling those same burrs off their own clothes for generations, and quietly boiling the healing root beneath them the entire time. The big soft leaves were not wasted either. Warmed and laid over an aching joint or a sore, swollen spot, they eased the deep aches of a walking life. The Roma understood a plant the way you only can when your life depends on it. Not one prized part kept and the rest thrown away, but every leaf, root, and burr turned to some quiet, patient use. Number 11 was the plant that coated and soothed a raw, burning throat like nothing else. Marshmallow, not the sweet, but the old root it was first named for. When a throat was scraped raw by coughing, or a cough turned dry and painful, the root was soaked in cool water for hours until it released a soft, slippery gel, and that gentle brew was sipped to coat and calm the sore places. The same soothing paste was smoothed over chapped, cracked skin and small burns to settle them. It is one of the softest, kindest plants in the whole herbal tradition, safe enough for a small child, and its slippery gel is still used in gentle throat and cough remedies to this very day. The Roma healer did not need to understand why it soothed. She only needed to see the child stop crying and finally swallow without wincing. A little of the cool, slippery gel was even smoothed onto the sore gums of a teething baby to quiet its crying through the night. In a world of harsh cures and bitter brews, marshmallow was the soft one, the kind one. The plant a healer reached for when the patient was very young, very old, or very frightened and needed comfort every bit as much as medicine. We are halfway down the list, and the strongest healing plants are still ahead. If your own grandmother ever swore by even one of these, then you already know this knowledge is worth saving from disappearing. So subscribe, and let's keep it alive together.
Number
10 is a plant most people stride straight past without a second glance. Mullein. Its tall stalk and soft, woolly gray leaves were dried and brewed into a mild tea for a dry, hacking cough and a tight, wheezing chest at night. It was used to soothe the airways and quiet a cough just enough for a tired body to finally sleep. The old healers called mullein the traveler's friend, and the name was earned because it grew on the very poorest, most broken, most neglected ground of all, the dusty, stony roadside edge where a Roma caravan was most likely to be grudgingly allowed to stop for a single night. The plant the settled world ignored grew exactly where the people the settled world ignored were forced to camp. The Roma noticed. They almost always did. And so the weed nobody wanted became the plant that carried their children through the night. The thick, woolly leaves were good for more than tea, too. Travelers tucked them into worn boots for a little warmth and softness against a blistered heel on a long march. A plant that grew on the poorest ground and asked for nothing gave the Roma, in return, a little of everything they needed most: warmth, comfort, and quiet nights. Number 9 grows in the cracks of your pavement right now, and the Roma treated it like an old friend. Nettle, yes, the plant that stings your bare ankles so cruelly in summer. But the very moment it is boiled, the sting vanishes completely, and what remains is one of the most mineral-rich green plants in the entire hedgerow. It was brewed into a deep, dark tea, or cooked down soft like spinach to revive a body worn thin and pale by a long, hungry winter, and to ease stiff, aching joints. They drank it gladly to wake the sleeping blood back up after months of cold. For a people who lived entirely by the slow turning of the seasons, that very first nettle tea of the year was almost a celebration of survival itself. Bitter, green-proof in a cup that they had made it through one more winter alive. They found a dozen uses for it beyond the pot. A nettle rinse to strengthen the hair, and strong fibers from the dried stalks twisted into thread and cloth. The plant that stung the careless hand rewarded the one who knew how to handle it, which was, in its way, the whole story of the Roma themselves. Fierce to those who grabbed at them, generous to those who took the time to understand them. Number 8 is the low green weed the Roma called nature's own bandage. Plantain, not the banana, but the broad-leafed plant of every roadside, yard, and trampled path. A single leaf was chewed soft or crushed between the fingers and pressed straight onto a bee sting, a nettle burn, or a small cut to cool the fire in it and calm the skin almost at once. They used it for all the small hurts of a life lived outdoors, and it grew free, always within arm's reach, no matter how far from any town they had wandered. It is one of the most widespread healing weeds on the entire earth, springing up wherever human feet pack the ground hard, which meant it was already waiting for the Roma at the edge of every camp they ever made, on every road they ever walked, a green first aid kit that asked for nothing at all. A chewed leaf was also bound over a splinter or a small boil to help draw it slowly to the surface and pressed onto a nettle sting to cancel the burn almost at once. It is the plainest, most trodden-on weed there is, and yet it has followed human roads across the whole world, quietly healing the very feet that walked over it, on every path the Roma ever took. Number 7 was the plant a healer reached for the very instant there was blood: yarrow. It's fine. Feathery green leaves were crushed hard between the fingers and pressed firmly down onto a cut or a deep scrape to help the bleeding slow and the skin begin to close. The Roma carried it dried, always, for the small wounds that a hard life outdoors inevitably brings. Its old folk name, in language after language right across the continent, translates simply to woundwort, the wound herb. And soldiers, shepherds, and travelers alike all swore by it for centuries, long before anyone could explain why it helped. A Roma healer measured a plant by exactly one thing. Did the bleeding stop? Did the child mend? Did the man walk again? And by that plain honest test, yarrow had earned its place in the pouch 1,000 times over. Beyond stopping blood, a warm yarrow tea was also drunk at the start of a cold to bring on a sweat and break a fever, and a fresh leaf was chewed to numb the ache of a bad tooth on a night with no help for miles. Few plants worked as hard in a healer's pouch, and fewer still were as easy to find, growing tough and unbothered along every dry roadside in Europe. Number 6 turned a common orange flower into the healer's favorite for broken skin. Calendula, the bright marigold from the side of the path. The petals were steeped slowly in warm, fat or oil for days to make a simple golden salve, then smoothed over chapped hands, raw scrapes, and sore cracked skin to soothe and shield it gently while it mended underneath. A little was kept in a small tin for every scraped knee and wind-burned cheek of childhood on the road. Pick up a gentle skin balm in any shop now, turn the jar over, and read the small print, and you will very often find calendula still listed there by name, doing the exact same quiet job it did in a Roma healer's battered tin 2 centuries ago. Some plants never needed improving, they only ever needed remembering. The petals were also scattered into thin soups and stews to lend them color and a little goodness when food ran short, and a mild petal wash soothed sore, inflamed eyes. It is one of the friendliest plants a healer could carry, bright enough to lift the spirits just by looking at it, and gentle enough to trust on the tenderest skin of the youngest child. Number 5 was the plant they trusted for a body that was bruised, sprained, and battered by the road. Comfrey. Its broad, rough leaves and thick root were mashed into a green pulp and bound over a bruise, a swelling, or a badly wrenched joint, always on the skin and never taken by mouth. It was used to ease the ache and calm the swelling while the body did its slow work of mending. Its old country name says everything: knitbone. Generation after generation watched it soothe the deep aches of hard physical lives, and it was one of the most trusted plants in any traveling healer's kit for exactly that reason. The Roma, who walked further and worked harder than almost anyone, had more need of a plant like comfrey than most, and they kept a patch of it near wherever they could. It was always kept for the outside of the body only, wrapped and bound over the hurt, and never brewed and swallowed. A careful rule the old healers passed down word for word, even without knowing the science behind their caution. That, in the end, was the quiet genius of the whole tradition. 1,000 years of watching had taught them not only what a plant could do, but exactly where its power should stop. Number 4 was the little red fruit gathered in autumn to carry the family through winter. The rosehip, the bright fruit the wild rose leaves behind when its petals fall. The Roma gathered the hips along the hedgerows, simmered them slowly, and strained them into a tart ruby syrup, taken all through the cold months to keep the family strong against the season. They knew nothing of vitamins, only that children who took the rosehip syrup seemed to weather the winter better. And here is the proof of how right they were. In the Second World War, when oranges and lemons vanished from an entire country, people were sent out into the hedgerows to gather wild rosehips by the ton, boiled into syrup and given to the nation's children, because that humble roadside fruit held more of what they needed than the fruit that could no longer be shipped. The Roma had been making that exact syrup for centuries. The dried hips were also brewed into a tart, cheering tea through the long winter, and the oil pressed from the seeds was smoothed onto weathered, wind-cracked skin. A wild rose gives the eye only a few weeks of flowers, but it gives the one who waits patiently until autumn a fruit that can carry a whole family through the coldest, darkest, hungriest part of the year. Number 3 was the golden oil the Roma called a little bottled sunshine. St. John's wort. Its small yellow flowers were gathered at midsummer and steeped in oil until the whole bottle turned a deep, glowing blood red, and that warm oil was rubbed gently onto the skin to soothe minor scrapes, small burns, and sore, tired muscles after a long day. They also drank a mild tea of it in the gray depths of winter, believing it lifted a low, heavy spirit and brought a little light back to the dark months. The plant flowers at the brightest time of the year, and the old healers felt, in their way, that it carried some of that summer light inside it. It is a plant to treat with respect and to ask a doctor about, but its warm red oil and its old reputation for chasing away the winter gloom kept it in the Roma healer's kit for centuries. Number 2 was less a single plant than an entire medicine chest growing in one tree, the elder. When the elder tree bloomed in early summer, its creamy flowers were gathered and dried, then brewed into a tea given at the first shiver of a cold to bring on a gentle, breaking sweat and ease a feverish, aching evening by the fire. Then, in autumn, the same tree hung heavy with dark purple berries, which were simmered with a little honey into a deep ruby syrup and spooned out all winter long to keep colds at bay and comfort a stuffed, heavy head. One tree, 2 harvests, a whole season of medicine. Elderberry is now one of the most studied folk remedies for winter sniffles on the entire pharmacy shelf, and the Roma were stirring their black iron pot of it for generations before it ever got a bright box and a barcode. To a healer, a single elder tree by the road was worth more than a shelf of bought bottles. So valued was the elder that many old country people would not cut one down without asking its pardon first, and every healer taught the young always to cook the berries and never eat them raw. A single elder standing at the roadside was, to a passing Roma family, something close to a friend, one that asked for nothing and gave, twice a year, exactly what the season demanded. And number 1, the plant so powerful that soldiers carried it into 2 world wars, garlic. To the Roma, it was the healer that lived in the ground. A raw clove was crushed into food at the first sign of a cold. Its strong juice was pressed onto a cut or a wound to keep it clean on a filthy road. And a peeled clove was even tucked into a pocket through the sickness of winter. They believed, deep in their bones, that it kept the whole body strong. And then history proved them right in the most dramatic way imaginable. In the First World War, and again in the Second, when the real medicine ran out on the battlefield, armies turned to crushed garlic, pressed straight onto soldiers' wounds to keep them from turning bad. They called it Russian penicillin, a peasant plant, a roadside crop, a thing the Roma had been crushing into their children's food for 1,000 years, pulled onto the front line to do the work of medicine when medicine itself had failed. The Roma were never behind the science. The science spent 1,000 years catching up to the plant in their hand, and it was never only the wound it guarded. Through every plague and hard winter that swept the roads of Europe, the Roma leaned on their pungent little clove, crushing it into broth and hanging it in the wagon, trusting it long before anyone on earth could say why it helped. The grandest laboratories in the world would eventually confirm what a barefoot healer already knew by heart, that some of the oldest medicine on earth was never rare, never costly, and never far away. It was growing, all along, in the dirt beneath them. So there they are, 20 healing plants that a hunted, wandering, unwanted people gathered from the ditches and hedges of a continent that would not give them a bed for the night. They had no pharmacy, no hospital, and no welcome. What they had was the patience to watch, season after season, which plants healed and which ones harmed, and the fierce, stubborn care to pass that hard-won knowledge from a grandmother's green-stained hands into a child's, road after road, fire after fire. Most of us traded every last bit of it for a pill in a box, and we proudly called that progress. Maybe, in many ways, it truly was. But there is a strange humility in realizing that the medicine cabinet the Roma needed was growing, all along, in the ground beneath their bare feet, free, patient, and waiting, exactly where the settled world was too busy to look. If even one of these plants made you want to slow down and look a little closer at the green things growing by the path, then subscribe. We bring back the wisdom the world threw away, one forgotten people at a time. And tell me down in the comments, which of these did your own grandmother use? Because in the end, the most powerful medicine these old healers ever passed down was never the plant itself, it was the knowing where to look.